It is commonly known that history is written by the winners. Yet, much like a coin, there are always two sides to the story. In the aftermath of the ban on women's football in 1921, one can be excused for thinking that the game came to a stutter, if not a complete halt for the women. Though the modern scene of women's football would suggest this notion, a dive into the past reveals that the women's game continued in rebellious fashion, which was best personified by the formation of the English Football Ladies Association. Prior to its ban in December 1921, women's football was mounting a powerful charge against the men's game, with women's matches regularly attracting equal and sometimes even more crowds than their masculine counterparts. Truly, women's football was on the up, and nothing seemed to be able to stop it up until the ban. In the aftermath of the ban, one might assume that women's football as a whole would simply cease to exist. Without association grounds to play on and to attract thousands, investors and higher-ups would no longer feel it to be beneficial to invest in women's football teams, and the women themselves would simply pack up their things and go back to their respective homes and resume their lives of subservience in accordance to the social standard of the day. Thankfully though, this was not the case, as an immediate reaction would follow. Only 5 days after its ban, representatives of at least 30 female football teams gathered in Liverpool to discuss their next steps in preserving the women's game in England. At the meeting's conclusion, the following had been agreed upon by all attendees. 1. The English Ladies Football Association would be established, with it comprising of a league with 57 amateur women's teams. 2. The English Ladies Football Association would endeavour to support and popularise football primarily amongst women, and also assist where possible in charitable causes. The association's administration would consist of W. Henley as its secretary, Fred K. Salmon, T. Foley, Harry Longworth, Thomas Balham, and Mrs. Barraclough as co-vice presidents, and finally, the manager and coach of Stoke Ladies at the time, Leonard Bridget, would serve as the inaugural president of the association. It would be Henley who organized the ELFA sophomore meeting on December 17 in Blackpool, where preliminary amendments to the rules of the football were made to better accommodate its female players, which included altering the size of the playing field, utilizing a lighter ball, eliminating charging, allowing hands to be used as facial protection against air balls. The third in the series of meetings held by the ELFA was held on the 7th of January 1922 in Manchester, where more of the association's rules were fleshed out. Key points from this meeting would include the reversal of the rule changes made in Blackpool, save for using a lighter ball for playing, and giving referees more impetus on how to handle charging in games. The establishment of 5 chapters across the country that would incorporate their own setup and competitive fixtures under the jurisdiction of a district committee, with the respective district champions ultimately coming together to determine a national champion. All ELFA member clubs would have to register and grant all players on their rosters amateur status. The management committee of every member club should consist of at least 3 married ladies. All ELFA member clubs would be prohibited from playing against non-member clubs. A player would be unable to represent a team that was more than 50 miles away from their hometown, unless the association had granted them special permission to do so. The last 2 key points from the Manchester meeting are intriguingly ironic for the ELFA to have implemented, especially when one considers the recent experience of the FA's ban on women's football. Interestingly enough, the final point served to do more harm than good to the one team that was arguably the standard bearer of women's football in England, as the Midland Daily Telegraph noted that this will mean the general breaking up of the famous Dick Kersley team, as the players are drawn from all parts of the country. With the behind-the-scenes affairs concluded, the LFA sprang into action onto the pitch through the establishment of the English Ladies Football Association Challenge Cup competition in the spring of 1922. The competition proved to be a middling success in terms of participation, as out of the clubs affiliated with the ELFA, only 23 entered the inaugural competition, with Huddersfield Alexandra ultimately making up the last number to make it 24 teams in total. On your screen now, you will see the initial tournament bracket. Now, normally, tournament fixtures are determined at random, but in the case of the ELFA Challenge Cup, teams were drawn against each other in accordance to proximity in order to minimize traveling as much as possible. Though some names drawn in the cup were easily recognizable, it was hard to ignore the fact that the previously mentioned Dick Kerr's ladies were nowhere to be found at all. This led to conspiracy theories that maybe the club had refused any affiliation with the ELFA, or there was conflict going on behind the scenes. That, though, is a story for another video. Out of the 24 teams that participated, it would be Leonard Bridget's Stoke ladies who would ultimately come out victorious, as they came out the winners. Until today, they are the only holders of the English Ladies Football Association Challenge Cup. As 1922 rolled by, the ELFA administration endeavored to have the association registered as a company in order to initiate revenue generation, as capital would be imperative in regulating women's football on a national scale, as well as being the female equivalent to the English FA. This registration process began with the establishment of the English Ladies Football Association Limited Company in 1922. The company's intent was to take over the assets, contracts, and liabilities of the unregistered association or club, now known as the English Ladies Football Association. This process was delayed until the company itself was finally registered on October 27, 1922. However, by that time, the writing was unfortunately on the wall. The failure of the ELFA to steer itself towards professional status prevented it from growing organically into the structures it had set for itself earlier in the year. By the end of 1922, just over a year since its inception, the ELFA was folded, and 11 years later, the English Ladies Football Association Limited Company would be formally struck down from the register of companies and subsequently dissolved. In the aftermath of the collapse of the English Ladies Football Association, the remaining women's teams, now without anyone to call a formal board to govern over them, began to formulate matches between one another from both inside and outside the country, but it was admittedly a far cry from the pre-1921 peak. Women's football is now confined to public parks and even dog racing tracks, and the lack of financial, playing, and coaching resources have put women's football on the brink of extinction yet again. The revolution, at least for now, was dead.